Hello friends, welcome to today's session, and today we would be discussing about private IP. So let's take a deep dive into it. So let's understand what is private IP first. So a private IP address is an IP address that is reserved for internal use behind a router or other network address translation device, that is NAT device, apart from the public. For now, ignore the NAT device, but we will discuss this NAT in detail in some other lecture. Right now, just focus on this router because that's where what we use, right, router and modems in our houses. So it would be easy for you to understand the concept. So um, it's a the private IP address is something that can be used behind a router. Again, private IP address are in contrast to public IP addresses, uh, also referred as local addresses sometimes. So public address, like I said, is open to public, something that can be exposed to public. And in contrast to that, private IP address is which is something internal. So also it's also referred as local IP address. And the private IP address ranges are, so it ranges from 10.0.0.0 to 10.255.255.255. So this is one of those ranges. The other reserved range for private IP address is 172.16.0.0 to 172.31.255.255. Note that the second octet of this goes from 16 to 31. It's not like in case of 10, like we have 0 to 255. Okay. Then the third IP address range is 192.168.0.0 to 192.168.255.255. So these are the three IP address ranges which are reserved for you can say private IPs. Now let's understand the use case of private IP. Where do we need it? So it's used in home devices. We would discuss a structure in this diagram in a short while, but let me explain the main use of this private IP addresses. So it's used in small, medium, and large scale companies. And why do we use it? So let's understand this by an example. So let's assume a company which has got, say, 10,000, 20,000 employees, or even let's say 5,000 for that sake. So even a small or medium company would have this many of employees, and these employees would need internet. Now, if I go for public IP address, I'll have to pay for it, for the public IP address. So imagine a case like, would I really purchase those 2,000 or 5,000 public IP address? If I really do that, then I will have to expend a lot. And in fact, in that case, every employee would use a laptop or a machine. And if I purchase those many public IP addresses, then first thing I will have to pay for it. Second thing, directly that laptop or that machine get exposed to internet. So the laptops or those machines are directly connected to internet, so a hacker can directly get access to those machines. So those are the risks if for going with the public IP addresses, which can be mitigated if we go with private IP address. I'm so sorry, private IP address. So how do we prevent that? So let's take a look at this diagram. Now, in this diagram, what happens is, so you have your internet access. So what company does, they have a router. So at this place, in the company premises, after a router, you can imagine a machine after router. So what happens is, usually the internet is given to your this NAT device, or the device which is public facing. Now it has this device already has a public address. Okay, so let's assume that 150.150.0.1, some public address, and inside this router you have your private network. And in private network, let's say you would have some IP, let's say 10.0.1.1. So you if you're sorry so let's go with the example. In the image, you can see you have your machine, let's say it has got IP 10.0.0.1. So now when you want to access any internet site, so the request is made by your host 10.0.0.1. Now it has private IP address. So when you Google, or when you open any website, it should have public IP address. Now, to fetch the page, your request would go to your router, and now your router would take this request to the internet. Now, when your router takes this to internet, so over the internet, whichever the website you have accessed, it would be kind of server. It would have some page. For example, let's say when you hit a facebook.com, the request would go to facebook.com server, and let's assume it would have some IP like 200.100.10.1. Then the page would be retrieved and it would be given back. Now, if I assume from the public point of view, the server would feel, the server internet server would feel that the request has come from your router 150.150.0.1, but actually the original request was made from your host, which has got internal IP. So your identity is hidden. If there is any attacker, the attack can be blocked at the router end, because on the router end, you can secure your router, you can have firewalls and all those stuff. So those attacks can also be prevented. And secondly, all you need to do is have few public IP address and not many. So instead of going for those 5,000 public IP addresses for your 5,000 employees, you can have 10 or 20 public IP address, because one or two routers may not be able to accommodate all those 5,000 employees. So you can have for the load balancing purpose, you can have X 10, 20 or whatever serves your need. You can have those many public IP address, and inside that you can have 5,000 internal IP address. And the next level of usages. So uh, imagine this kind of structure in my company. Now, public IP address is unique. So if you have public IP address, if you have already taken this address 150.150.0.1, I cannot take it, because public IP address has to be unique. But in case of private, I can take it. So now your private IP address 10.0.0.1, which your machine has got internally as a private IP address. So this IP address is not broadcasted. It would not be, it would not do any communication behind the router, sorry, outside the router. It would do the communicate with all the machines within same network, like 10.0 network, right? Within my company, which is again a different network from this, my I can use the same range of 10.0.0. So even my machine can have 10.0.0.1. So in my private network, I'm using a unique private IP. In your private network, you are using a unique IP, which is again 10.0.0.1. So the use case, like we are using the same IP in our own private network. So the usability is increased. You saved on cost, and even the attack was reduced. Like you can save those 5,000 machines. You can put those 5,000 machines behind a firewall, because these routers are smart devices. You can have smart firewalls in this place. So this is the actual usage of private IP address, and how you can also facilitate the purpose. So you can, the purpose was to provide internet to all those employees, which is served with, along with safety and kind of mitigation of all those factors. Okay, so that is what the usage of private IP is. There are many more concepts of reserved IP and other IPs, but I don't want to get in detail. We would be focusing strictly on whatever topics we would need for this our discussion. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I would love to see your comments or your views in the comment section. So let me know your views on this private section of private IP address. See you in the next session with some more interesting topics. Goodbye.